Hello class. This is a quick video to help you get started on your homework, which is Aldwell-Schachter textbook page 180, number 4. It's a figured baseline and we're going to harmonize it in 4 parts. There are some more complicated looking figures than we've dealt with before, but we'll still use the same process, which is to first, in a line below the given figures, we're going to write the expanded complete figures under every base note. We know when we see a note with nothing below it, that implies a root position triad, so we are going to write 5, 3. And then just go on and write a whole stream of complete figures below these abbreviated figures. When you have a 6 by itself under a note, it means 6, 3. The 3 is implied. Here we have 2 6s, and what that means is there are going to be 2 voices above this bass note that both have the note that's a 6th above the bass note. One of them is going to continue with that note through the beat that is the duration of this bass note. The other one is going to move during the bass note. It's going to go from 6 to 5. So we'll get to that when we start writing the notes in. But for now, let's just write this as a more complete figure. We have a 6 that continues. We have a 6 that is going to move in 8th notes to 5, and we have a 3rd above the bass note. G with nothing under it, again, that's going to be a 5, 3. Here's just a plain 6. We know that implies 6, 3. A 4 with a slash through it, and a 2. We know that a 4, 2 under a bass note means it's really a 6, 4, 2 chord, and the slash through the 4 means that we're going to raise it. So we'll put a sharp on the 4, and this figure expands to 6, a sharp 4, and a 2. Here again is a bass note with just a 6, so we know that means 6, 3. And a bass note with only a sharp means the sharp applies to the 3rd above the bass note, and since there are no other numbers there, it's just like this kind of bass note where there are no figures. It implies 5, 3, but the sharp applies to the 3, so we'll put 5 and a sharp 3. The rest of this line is things we've seen before. Bass note with nothing, nothing, so those are 5, 3. The 4, 2 we've dealt with over here, and the 6 we've dealt with there. And in fact, from our discussion in class, we can kind of suspect that if you see a 4, 2 followed by a 6, it's going to be a 5, 4, 2 chord followed by a 1, 6, because that's such a common progression. But you go ahead and on your papers, you fill in the rest of these. Okay, so a 6 with a line after it, that's just ensuring us that this harmonization goes on for the whole bass note, so we'll just put 6, 3 underneath it, and that's going to sustain for the whole half note. Now we have an 8, 7. That means that one of the upper voices is going to have to break into quarter notes over this half note and move from an octave to a 7th above the bass note. Sharp alone applies to the 3rd. So when we expand this one, it's really going to have 3 voices in it. We'll have the 8 to 7. That'll move in quarter notes. There's a 5 implied because the sharp is there by itself, and that implies that we have a root position triad, and the sharp goes on the 3rd. So we can write this with lines after the 5 and the 3, meaning that they sustain for the half note. The 8 to 7 is going to move, and then the last chord is just going to be our tonic triad again. 5, 3. There. So we have all of our figures. Let's go back up to the top line here, and our next task is to translate these expanded figures into modern Roman numerals so we know what harmony we're working with. And as we've done before, we can do this by brute force and just take the figures literally, write notes in on the staff, and just have a look at what chord is created. So I know you probably recognize what the first chord is going to be, but let's just show how it would work to put a fifth and a third above the G. I'm going to just put these as little dots on the bass staff. We won't really harmonize it this way, but there's a fifth and a third above the G, and now we can quickly recognize that that is a 1 chord. So we're in G minor, and we've started our modern Roman numeral analysis. It'll go on this level here. The next bass note has a ton of figures below it. It looks like a mess, but it's really not that bad. We'll just look below this line at the expanded figures we did. We added a 3, we had a 6 there already, and the 6 appears in 2 voices. So to write all the notes in, let's start with the 6th, because we're going to have to get a 6 that sustains for the whole duration of the beat, and we're going to have to get a 6 that moves in 8th notes from 6 to 5. So let's worry about those first. A 6th above F sharp is a D, and I'm going to put the D in the tenor voice that sustains. That's a nice simple note. It has the same duration as the bass note. We also need another voice to have a 6 that moves down to a 5, so that D is going to move a step down to a C. And we'll have to divide the beat into 2 eighth notes to do that. Let's do that in the alto voice. We'll get our 6-5 up there. And now I'm actually writing in a voicing that we can use in our final harmonization. Unlike this one, this was just to try to name this as a G minor chord, and I'm going to erase that. This is a real voicing that we can use. So the 6 to 5 is taken care of with that D going to the C. Now we need a note that's a third above the F sharp, and a third above F sharp is A. So somewhere in one of the upper voices we need an A. The voice that's remaining is the soprano, and so we'll put the A there. Now we've actually harmonized this beat in probably its final form. We may not have to adjust that at all, but it also allows us to look at it and see what Roman numeral this is. So the notes are F sharp, D, C, and A. What Roman numeral would that be? Well, if we shuffle the notes around, we get a 7th chord spelling of D, F sharp, A, and C. D, F sharp, A, C. So the root is D. That is scale degree 5, so the Roman numeral is 5. The D is not in the bass. There's some other note in the bass. There's an F sharp there, so we know this is an inverted chord. And I'll just remind you quickly, when you're doing this, the same figures that you find in the old-fashioned figured bass with the bass note will magically end up showing up on our modern Roman numeral figured bass analysis. So we could look at this and figure out that this is a 5-6-5 chord, or we can just bring the 6 and the 5 down here and be confident that it's going to be correct. So that is actually a 5-6-5 chord, and you can work that out for yourselves with an F sharp, a D, and an A. Third of the chords in the bass. The 7th doesn't come in until the second half of the beat, but it is there, so we'll call the whole thing a 6-5 chord. G with a 5-3 below it, that's a 1. Now we have a 6th below a C, that means a 6-3 chord. So let's figure this one out just by putting the dots in again. So a third above C would be the E flat. A 6th above C would be the A natural. So C, E flat, and A natural. How do we rotate that around in our heads to spell a triad? A, C, E flat. All right, so it's an A, C, E flat chord. That means the root is A, and in the key of G, A is the second scale degree, so this is a 2 chord. We also know from our knowledge of minor scales that the 2 chord is diminished. We can also spell it out, A, C, E flat, and recognize that that is diminished. With the 6 underneath it, we know this is an inverted chord. The triad is A, C, E flat, so this is the third of the chord appearing in the bass, so it's first inversion, which would make it a 2 diminished 6 chord. And once again, this 6 ends up coming down here like that. So that's a 2 diminished 6 chord. There's one more tricky chord on this line for us to do, but we've already expanded the figure to 6, sharp 4, and 2, and all we have to do is write these notes in and have a look at them and translate it into a Roman numeral. So let's go from the bottom. We need a second above C, that'll be a D. We need a sharp 4 above C, that'll be an F sharp. This is how I do it sometimes when I'm harmonizing. Then I'll erase these to get them out of the way. Right now I'm just trying to identify the Roman numeral. And we need a 6th above C, which will be an A. So this is a familiar configuration. We have a C and then a D, F sharp, A chord. So we can see that the 7th of the chord is in the bass, but otherwise we just have a D major triad, D, F sharp, A, and the C is in the bass. D, F sharp, A, C is a 5-7 chord in the key of G minor, so we know our Roman numeral is going to be 5. But we're not going to put a 7 there because the chord is inverted. The 7th is in the bass. That means it's a 4-2 chord, and sure enough, that agrees with the 4-2 we have here. So I'll just put a 5-4-2 chord, and we have correctly analyzed that chord. The slash through the 4 and the sharp on this 4 are not needed when we put figures with a Roman numeral. The information of this being a sharp 4, that is an F sharp, is contained just in the fact that we've used a capital Roman numeral. The capital 5 would not be capital if it weren't a D, F sharp, A major triad. So the information is there, but it's just expressed differently, so we don't have to put a sharp on the 4. The capital Roman numeral implies that. Now we have a 6-3 chord. I'll let you figure that one out. A 5 with a sharp 3, I'll let you figure that one out. And then these two measures are the same as what happened right here, so we've already done that. Let's go down to the bottom of the page again. Well, we've done this one before. We had a 6-3 below the bass note C. Up above, you can see that on your paper. And that just ends up being a 2 diminished 6, right? Because it's going to be C, E flat, and A natural. 2 diminished 6. Let's deal with this one now. Our expanded figure is this bit of it right here. The 8-7, the 5, and the sharp 3. Let's put all those in, and this will end up being voice leading that you can use. Where shall we put the moving 8-7? Maybe we'll put that in the alto. That seems like it would go well there. So 8 to 7, that's going to go from a D to a C above the bass note. So this is an octave, that's the 8. And here's the 7th, that's a C. And we're dividing the rhythm of the bass note into 2 beats. That's what we have to do to get both an 8 and a 7 in there. The other notes we can just make half notes. So a 5th above D is an A. I'm just hoping that this will work when we get our whole melody written in. We can kind of lead to this and make the voicing work. And then, let's see, we need a sharp 3 above the D, which will be an F sharp. That's a bit low in the tenor, but but hopefully this will work out okay. The other thing we could have done was put the F sharp in the soprano and the A in the tenor. That voicing might have looked a little bit better. So when you get to doing yours, realize that this is not an order, a vertical order that these figures have to go in. We put the 8/7 in the alto, we put the 5 above it in the soprano. So you can flip these around. You could put the 8/7 up, going D to C in the soprano if you want to. It all depends on where your melody, how the contour of the melody goes. All right. But now you've got a 5/7 chord. I think we can recognize that. It's D, F sharp, A, and then the D moves to C, introducing the 7th. So this is a root position 5/7 chord, and that's going to resolve to a 1 chord. So that is enough to get you started on the Roman numerals. Now, the two really important steps we have left to go are writing a melody and then filling in inner voices. So let's go back up to the top part of the page and look at the help that we get from the assignment on writing our melody. These little curves with 10s appear in the book, so I've copied them onto this page here, and that just means the soprano should be a 10th above the bass. I'm going to take this moment to erase our scratch work, because now that we've got the Roman numerals, we don't need to see those notes anymore, and we're going to replace them with actual harmonization, voice leading, and SATB, not just dots on the bass clef. So let's get what help we can from these numbers. The first one here, this swooping curve, is telling us that the soprano should be a 10th above the bass, so G is in the bass, and we need a B flat in the soprano. Good, because that gives us a stepwise moving soprano, so that's probably fine. Let's look over here. Another B flat above this G, and then we also need, apparently, a 10th above the C. What's a 10th above a C that's in this key? Well, it would be an E flat. So we'll put that there. Now we've taken care of all of those hints. Now, what you need to do is, following your harmonization here, write a good soprano line. Contrary motion is always nice. So going from the A, we could come down to a G. So as the bass is rising from F sharp to G, the soprano can be descending from A down to G. Now, keeping spacing in mind, we don't want to get our soprano too low and crowding into the middle range here, but we need a note that will fit into the 2 diminished 6 chord. That's an A, C, or an E flat to be our next melody note. We can't put a C here because that would create parallel octaves, right? We already have G to C in the bass, so we can't go up to C. I would like to create a little more vertical space, but I think we're just going to go up by step to the A. That gives us a chord tone that we need. Now moving on to the 5/4/2 chord, let's see, the notes in the 5/4/2 chord are going to be D, F sharp, A, and C. So it's possible to hang on to this A in the soprano, but since the bass note is already sustaining, I think a moving soprano would be nice here to emphasize that the chord is changing over a stationary bass note. So let's move the A up to a chord that we need, to a tone that we need to complete this chord. There's a C already in the bass, so we don't need that. We were on an A and we're leaving that. F sharp, if we're going to go up, would be too high. That would be a big leap. So let's just go from the A up to the D. And that should make a nice sounding progression. When you have a bass note that's sustaining and the chord is changing, it's nice to move the upper voices in a convincing way. Our next chord, oh, I didn't write the Roman numeral in. I'll just tell you now what that's going to be. If you have a B flat with a sixth below it and we're in the key of G minor, that's going to end up being a 1/6 chord. You can probably figure that out just by eye yourself, because the 6 implies 6/3. That means we're going to have a D and a G above the B flat. So this is a 1/6 chord. So our next soprano note has to be either G, B flat, or D. We can't do B flat. Do you see why? Because the bass is going down by step to B flat, and if the soprano is going down by leap to a B flat, that will create direct octaves. So we're not going to do that. For these purposes, I'm tempted to just stay here on the D. Yeah, let's just do that. Let's just stay on the D. This makes a very boring soprano, but we'll let ourselves get away with it for this assignment. And then that D can stay there because we see that's going to end up being a 5 chord. It's a very boring end of that phrase, but we'll just let that slide for now. And then once you have your soprano written, then the last task is to write the inner voices. So let's get that started as well. Go back to the beginning. Our 1 chord is going to be G, B flat, and D. We've got a B flat there, so we need a D. We'll put that in the alto. See, that works nicely by essentially sustaining onto the next note. And we can double our bass by putting a G in the tenor. That's not too awkward for the tenors to sing down a 4 to that D. We'll let that go as it is, because we kind of like having a doubled root on the first beat. Okay, we already did our second beat, and we've kind of spliced into that. We need to move from this 5/6/5 to a 1 chord. Most important is resolving the 7th of the 5/7 inverted chord properly. So we know the C has to move down to a B flat. So now we have G, B flat, and G. That'll allow us to just leave the tenors on that D, like that, to complete the chord. And you have to have something to do yourself, so I will leave the rest of this to do inner voices and complete your soprano. Down here, we already did this more involved little measure here that had the 8/7. So just lead your soprano to that A, finish the phrase on the 1 chord, complete your inner voices, and I'll look forward to seeing how this goes for you.